It's Pastor Matthew here for our Children's Praise lesson this morning. We're working through the Catechism and we're getting into some pretty deep topics. We've talked about a lot of important things, and some of these words you might remember, some you might not. I want to ask this word. It's a big review. This is from many weeks ago. We talked about this word called providence. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that word means. You're going to have to look at the old video or talk to your teacher today. But I want you to think, do you know what the word providence is? We talked about it, so now's a good time to review. One of our new words from most recently is the word sin. We talked about sin, and the question we had before is, what is sin? Sin, we're told, is disobeying or not conforming to the law of God in any way. So if you remember, you learned about the ruler, like God's law, was pressed down on the clay, and the clay conformed to it. That is a great image of what sin is. Sin is when we don't conform to God's rule or God's law. So that idea is pretty clear enough. Well, where did it all go bad? This is our question today. What is wrong with the world, and how did sin, that sin we talked about earlier, how did that enter into the world? Here's the question we have from number 15. It says this: by what sin did our first parents fall from their original condition? By what sin did our first parents fall from their original condition? So the real short way to say it is, what was the sin that Adam and Eve did? The answer is, our first parents' sin was eating the forbidden fruit. Do you remember that story? Have you heard about this? About the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that was in the garden at the very beginning in Genesis? They committed the sin of eating the forbidden fruit from that tree that they weren't allowed to eat. So I want to read this story for you, and we're going to make this a shorter video where you're just going to understand the story. And we'll look at it and you'll see what it all means. It says this: when God made everything, he made it very good, and he put in the middle of the garden a tree of life and also a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then there was a slithering snake. Go like this with your hands. This is what the snake does. And he went up the tree and he got really close to Eve, and he started talking to Eve about lying words. We call those deceptive words. So you can almost hear him saying it in a soft whisper, kind of like almost what you have in your mind. And this is what happened. He said to the woman, this is Genesis 3 at the beginning, did God actually say you should not eat from the tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That's the name of the tree. The tree that was in the garden was the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent said, well, if you eat this, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And that was a lie, because none of us can be like God. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eye, and that the tree was desirous to make one wise, she took the fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. And here's a really important verse. The very next thing says this: then they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees in the garden. So let's recap. We know that Adam and Eve were in the garden, and now you can see that picture. You're going to see a drawing of just what it would look like, just as a cartoon. Adam and Eve were in the garden, and there was the tree and the snake. And what happened was, the snake said, you know what, God told you not to eat these things, but I think you should, because God's trying to keep something from you. And so we know the woman said that it was good for food, it was a desire to the eyes, and it was a desire to make one wise. Those are three really, really important temptations that made her want to eat of the fruit that was on the tree. And so she ate it, and then she gave some to her husband Adam, and he ate it. And then what happened was a feeling that you and I know, which is they felt really, really guilty, or they felt really ashamed. Have you ever felt really embarrassed? Have you ever had to be in front of people and talk in front of people, and you feel like they're all looking at you with their eyes and they're kind of judging you and it makes you uncomfortable? Or have you ever been in trouble where maybe you did something wrong and your mom and dad scolded you or yelled at you and it made you feel bad, or all the other kids saw you do something that wasn't right and they were all pointing at you and laughing at you? That kind of feeling is something what Adam and Eve felt like, because they felt guilty and they felt ashamed. And so they ran away from God. So we need to know, and this is our lesson today, that the reason there's sin in the world and the reason the world has so many problems is because of this very first sin of eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that we were not supposed to eat. And so we know the only way to be reconciled to God or be brought back to God is because we have an ability to do that in Jesus Christ, that we shouldn't run away from God like Adam and Eve did, but we should go to Jesus Christ and learn how to do that every day. And so that's our lesson today on how sin entered the world.